My name is Susan Karanja. I am a neurosurgeon at Kenyatta National Hospital.
Neurosurgery is one of medicine's most coveted fields. But for Dr. Susan Karanja, this was an unlikely journey. A billboard with emaciated adults changed her focus from a passion in music and art to medicine, and now to one of Kenya's very few female neurosurgeons.
So my life journey into neurosurgery, I'd say probably started, well, all go through the usual, the exams from primary to high school. But I think all I knew through high school and through is I want to be a doctor. So then I got into medical school, and there, just going through the rigors, the studying, the hard work. At the end of the 5 years, all I knew is I want to be a surgeon. So I didn't really have any particular leaning of where I'd like to go. But during internship, as I went through internship, I knew for sure it's surgery. But then I remembered how I enjoyed neurology as a rotation. And I like surgery. So I thought, well, neurology and surgery meet together at neurosurgery, and that's the way I decided to go. And then I also like the fact that neurosurgery is actually one of the younger fields in medicine. And so there's also still a lot of discovery, a lot of development going on. And so it's an exciting field, and at the same time a challenging field, because every day with the new knowledge, you have to learn how to do things differently as research comes up. So yeah, so I think for me neurosurgery that was a journey. So then after internship and deciding neurosurgery is the way, I started now the process of applying, and I was fortunate enough to get a place at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, South Africa. So that's where I went to do my neurosurgery. Of course, it was difficult initially, first being in a different country, away from home, and then just having to learn a new skill. And from the word go there, when you land, immediately you're put to work. So you have to learn very quickly these new skills, the language that people are using to describe things. But it was, as challenging as it was an enjoyable 5 years. Yeah, and then now, after the 5 years is where I did my exam, completed and qualified, and then now came back home to start working here. I was born in Nairobi, but we lived in Kikuyu my whole life. I think we only lived within Nairobi for about 5 years. So I've spent most of my life in Kikuyu. But in schools, in primary school, I went to Consolata Primary School. Then after that, high school, I was at the Precious Blood Riruta. And growing up, I'd say my childhood was actually enjoyable. My parents really tried to expose me to a lot of things. Some of my happy moments from childhood to now, I got to go to the UK when my mom was there for her PhD and help her with her research. Basically, my work was watering her plants. Because she's a soil scientist, so her research was greenhouses and plants, so that was a happy moment. Going on those trips to the dams with my dad was also very nice, because now when we'd come to the hydroelectricity part of science, I looked like a genius. I could tell the whole process from the water to how the electricity comes at the end. Getting a sister, after being an only child for 7 years, that was very exciting. Then I think for me, KCPE finishing was also very nice. Getting to my high school of choice was excellent. Finishing high school was even better. I was not a big fan of boarding school. Another exciting moment was passing first year of medicine, because that was a rough year. And then passing third year of medicine, which was also a very tough year. And then finishing. I loved internship. I think that will always be a highlight. As much as everyone says internship is hard, for me it was very nice. And I made some of my lifelong friends during internship. A highlight for me in South Africa during residency would be the first case, first tumor case I was able to do alone, which was just amazing, because you never picture yourself there. You always see other people get there. And then when I passed my final exam, I was just ecstatic. And then coming back home was also amazing, because at that point in time, I'd been in a long distance marriage for 4 years. So it was nice to finally come home. The other highlight is the birth of my son. Oh yeah, there was a wedding day. How did I forget that? But I think it's because, you know, my wedding day, I came 2 weeks before the wedding, and then 2 weeks after the wedding, I was back at school. So I think it was just so rushed. And my poor husband had planned the wedding alone because I wasn't there. Because I came 6 months to the wedding, picked the vendors, left. And then I came back 2 weeks to the wedding. That was the first time I saw my dress, and that's the first time I was fitting it. And that's the first time I was seeing all the things these vendors were going to do on that day. Next thing was the wedding, honeymoon, back to school. The reason I chose Durban, one, I guess also the head of unit was an influence, because for me, going where there was a Kenyan was a bit encouraging. But then also because Durban is a largely black population, so the disease profile and the conditions they have would be very similar to what we have here. And I felt that was important so that I'm able to integrate back home easily. And then the other thing with Durban, it's also, compared to the other provinces in South Africa, for example, Cape Town or Johannesburg, there's one neurosurgical center for the whole province. So that also was a bit like what is here. So it was a very high volume center, which meant in the time that I was there, I was going to be exposed to a very large number and variety of cases, which for me I felt is very important to be able to learn the skills needed to a level where if you come back, you're able to work without struggling too much. I remember when I was starting off, one of my consultants in South Africa told me, as a neurosurgeon, you always walk with the angel of death on one shoulder, just simply because of how serious some of our patients are. Losing a patient never gets easy. That's the honest truth. And I think it's even worse when it's a child. So it's something you carry with you for a while. You find you keep questioning yourself, you keep questioning decisions you made, you keep questioning the things you did in theater, you go through them in your head, and eventually you do settle down, but then you find that every patient you lose it becomes like a lesson you learn. So it builds you. It's a painful process, but it sort of builds you as a doctor. It helps you mature, especially as a surgeon, helps us now refine to pick cases better. So now you're able to say, okay, the last time I did this case, this and this happened. Maybe the next time I'll go with someone else, or I'll just refer to my senior. Yeah, so it's usually a very painful process. And like with children, sometimes you find you'll go home and you almost want to cry when you remember. Yeah. I think the most important part to start is in our education system. If you remember most of our science books, for example, whenever they'd put a doctor, it was a photo of a man. There were no female If it's a nurse, that's when they'd put a female. So we need to start just from the basic education books, where we need to show children that either gender can play either role. Engineers are not only men, doctors are not only men. And then also STEM, science, technology, engineering, all those need to become almost like more of a core. And one of the things is they need to consider programs where now they pick professionals to give these talks. So, you know, if, for example, I go give a talk, or my colleague Dr. Shitsama, who's also a neurosurgeon, goes and gives a talk somewhere, by the time these children are getting to high school, they're aware, as much as I'm female, I can do all these things. The potential is there. The young men can also see, okay, so nursing is not just for women, there are male nurses, and those ones are never highlighted in this country. So it's an issue of perception. So our books should show either gender. We should, when we're giving these talks, we should invite both genders, not just the male doctors. And I think that will help change the perception in most of our country. Okay, so that work-life balance thing, it takes time. It's a challenge, especially in fields like ours where you can be called anytime. But I think one of the things is to be very intentional. So when it's time for the children, it's time for the children. The phone is on silent. Those are the days if you try to reach me, you'll be very annoyed. You'll be like, what type of doctor is this? And then when it comes to family time, I also really try to be intentional about making time for my family. But when it's work, once I enter Kenyatta, I'm here fully. Because strangely, I don't know what it is about this hospital. I keep telling even my mom, there's just something about Kenyatta that, and the patients here, that I like. I don't know what it is. I have never gotten that feeling anywhere else. So when I'm here, I'm here. Yeah, and I think you find when you divide your life like that, it helps. It's hard for females, but men seem to have that fragmentation in their heads very easily. So I've had to watch my husband and see he's very sharply fragmented. And when the time passes, he actually gets up and goes and says, okay, time is up, next thing. My day starts at 5:30. Then I'll spend about an hour to an hour and a half now playing with my child, getting him ready for the day, so that by 7:30 I'm ready to leave. So on Mondays, because we start very early at Kenyatta, I'll be here around 8 so that we can start our ward round, and then from there proceed to seeing patients in the clinic. So on an average day after the clinic, I'll have a bit of lunch, and then in the afternoon, again, see more patients at the clinic. And then I try to finish my days, if possible, around 4 or 5, so that I'm home from 5 to 7. Again, to spend time with the baby before putting him to sleep. On the days when I have theatre, the day starts a bit earlier. So from 8, I'm in theatre, and that usually by 5 is when I'm hoping to leave the hospital. That is if the case goes as planned. But with theatre, we tend to leave ourselves flexible. You might find 7 is when you're finishing, that's when you'll go home. In case of emergencies, at least that one now is as it comes, I deal with it. So when the emergencies, my day ends whenever.
Health Digest, brought to you by KCC Gold Crown Lactose Free Milk.